Joining us this week is Lauren Cowles. Lauren, thanks for pinch hitting for Steve this week.
Thanks for having me.
It's a kind of busy week here in D.C., but it's busy for reasons we didn't really expect to be busy. The conversation about Syrian refugees has been one that's been kind of bubbling up, mostly on the political side in the presidential debates. But just now we had a vote on a bill in the House. Mm-hmm. Talk to us a little bit about what that bill does and what the final vote was.
Right. So the final vote was 290 to 137, with 47 Democrats supporting the Republican bill. It would create an extra layer of security and checks regarding the entrance of Syrian refugees into the U.S. So basically the Secretary of Homeland Security, along with the Director of National Intelligence and Director of FBI, would have to personally certify that anyone entering the U.S. didn't pose a threat.
So this vote would give Republicans a veto-proof majority
in
the House moving forward. And President Obama has already said that he would veto this legislation if it makes it the way to his desk.
Right.
Next stop, obviously, before we get to the president's desk, is the Senate. Talk to us a little bit about what's likely to happen in the Senate.
Right. So Harry Reid has vowed that this bill will not ever make it to the president's desk. He's said that he's going to block the bill. Senator Feinstein and Senator Flake are working on a bipartisan bill to address the visa waiver program. That's the program that they see as the biggest weakness in terms of security for the U.S. The refugee program is actually pretty hard to get to the U.S. through that program. It's an 18 to 24-month vetting process. A lot of people in the intelligence community would say that no halfway capable terrorist would ever try to get in the U.S. that way. It's easier just to buy your commercial airline ticket and come to the U.S. as a tourist or on a business visa. And that's how the 9/11 hijackers got into the U.S. And really, that's what we saw in Paris. I mean, those folks were French and Belgian people that the U.S. has a visa waiver program with.
Two additional questions. One, were you surprised at the number of Democrats who voted for it, 47 in the House, or did you think it could possibly be more? And secondly, politically, how do you think this issue plays?
I thought that the number could have been more Democrats. It seems like a lot of the members of the Democratic caucus haven't been particularly satisfied with the way that the White House and President Obama have explained their objections to the bill. So I thought you could see a number closer to 60 Democrats. 47 is still a pretty significant chunk of the caucus to vote with the Republicans. Politically, I certainly think this is going to continue to be an issue. I think we're already seeing it bleed into the appropriations bills in the Senate. The Senate is now on the transportation appropriations bill, and Senator Paul has filed an amendment saying that no barring federal funds and federal benefits going to Syrian refugees. He argues it's germane to the bill because in addition to transportation, it funds the Housing and Urban Development Agency. So, we'll see. He's vowed to block further action on the bill until he gets a vote on that. So we're already seeing it bleed into other topics.
Well, and there's been a lot of discussion over the last couple of months about how Republicans would use, things like reconciliation, whether they use it to try to repeal Obamacare, or go after executive orders on immigration or Planned Parenthood funding. And the caucus has been really divided. Mm-hmm. But now, as we kind of have turned our attention to the Syrian refugee issue, we're hearing a lot, at least among Republican circles, that as we start looking particularly towards an omnibus in December, that Republicans may be quickly coalescing around a omnibus that includes the Syrian refugee legislation, and essentially saying, some folks, even from the Freedom Caucus, saying that they might be willing to vote for an omnibus that funds Obamacare, that funds Planned Parenthood, that doesn't do anything about executive action on immigration, none of that stuff, if it includes language on Syrian refugees. Do you think we're headed towards a major battlefront here legislatively in December?
I do. I do think there are areas we can find common ground. I think that you're going to have your folks on either side of the aisle, sort of on the extreme wings, that probably aren't going to agree to anything except 100% of what they want. But I do think, we have 47 Democrats in the House who are clearly ready and willing to address this issue, even going so far as to vote for the Republican plan to deal with refugees. And I think in the Senate, you're seeing a willingness by some Democrats to either consider a plan closer to what the Republicans in the House have passed, and even some Democrats who aren't willing to go that far. You've seen, Senator Feinstein has a bill with Senator Flake that we talked about earlier. So I do think people are willing to talk about the issue, and I think that it will certainly be an issue to be addressed.
Well, and obviously this conversation was happening mostly before the Paris attacks, was mostly happening in the context of the presidential nominating process on both sides of the aisle. And I want to talk to you a little bit about how this has impacted particularly the Democratic state of the race, and then just more generally kind of what the state of the race is at this point. So first off, how much of an impact do you think the question over Syrian refugees and more broadly the kind of response to the Paris attacks is going to have on the Democratic presidential primary race?
Well, I think it puts particularly Hillary Clinton on the defensive. It's a subject on which she's very competent, very capable of talking about, very good on the issues, very knowledgeable. But I definitely think it puts her on the defensive, being part of the president's administration during his first term. She's going to continue to have to answer questions about his handling of the situation in the Middle East, and that's going to include the Paris attacks, even though she hasn't been Secretary of State for a number of years. It all sort of bleeds together.
Right.
So I definitely think that it's put her a little bit on the defensive, although I would say within the Democratic field, you can see that she's clearly the most competent and capable of our potential nominees to handle the issue.
How do you think this impacts the candidacy of somebody like Bernie Sanders? I mean, the whole reason behind Bernie Sanders' candidacy has been questions around the economy and income inequality, and as he said, this idea that the economy is rigged.
Right.
I watched the Democratic debate, and when they gave each of the candidates at the opening an opportunity to respond to what had happened in Paris the night before, Bernie Sanders took very little time talking about what happened in Paris and very quickly switch back to his message about income inequality. How do you think a renewed focus on foreign policy is going to impact Bernie Sanders' campaign?
Well, I don't think that foreign policy is the issue that excites his base. I think the issue that excites his base and the people that he's talking to and the people that he's bringing on board onto his campaign, the issues they care the most about are income inequality, Wall Street, climate change, healthcare, your more sort of domestic social issues. And this is not a primary focus of his campaign. It's not a primary focus for the people who are voting for him and supporting him.
So I always tell people that as we've kind of gone through this like silly season during the primaries where a lot of different things are happening, but nobody's cast any votes. And I always like to tell people that I think around this time, around Thanksgiving, the cake starts getting baked because people start paying attention to the holidays and they're not so focused on what's happening in the presidential primary races. And then we come back after Christmas and New Year's, and Iowans vote at the end of January in the Iowa caucuses. Obviously, there's only 3 Democrats in the race now, Martin O'Malley, Bernie Sanders, and Hillary Clinton. All the polls show Hillary Clinton not only way ahead nationally, but she has retaken the lead in New Hampshire, grown her lead in Iowa. Do you see anything fundamentally altering the landscape of the race right now between now and, say, January?
Not in terms of what we can predict and what we know now. Unless someone has a huge gaffe, unless Hillary Clinton takes a really, really big stumble and falls hard, which I don't think she will do. No, I really, truly think that Hillary Clinton will be the Democrats' nominee. Of course, the Paris attacks, I think, are going to continue to plague her. Unfortunately, these attacks sort of bring an issue to the forefront in the foreign policy realm that I think shows us how far we've come from arguably her and the administration's biggest foreign policy victory, which was the capture and killing of Osama bin Laden. So that's unfortunate for her. But barring some huge stumble, I don't see a path forward for anyone but her.
Do you think that this will give her the opportunity? I think you're right that a lot of these questions are going to dog her about like what this administration has done because of her ties to this administration. Right. But do you think that if she were to wrap this up early, if things don't fundamentally change, if she wins in Iowa and she wins in New Hampshire and she wins in South Carolina, then that's probably game over. Right. Do you think that that gives her the opportunity to kind of turn to a general election strategy at that point and really start maybe putting some distance between herself and the Obama administration, something which clearly she can't do at this point in the primary process?
Right, I do. I think that we'll see a shift from her. Right now she's tying herself very closely to President Obama, very closely to his policies, and I think come the time when she has the nomination locked up, I think we'll see a shift, and she'll be highlighting some of her policy differences with President Obama, which she does have policy differences with President Obama, particularly on foreign affairs, but she's not talking about them now.
Right. Well, it's probably going to be a little crazier on my side of the aisle over the next couple of months, but it will be fun. It'll be fun to watch it play out. Yeah. Lauren, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.